Hey, friendo, Steve here. Welcome back to Good Idea, Bad Idea. On this episode, we're going to start off with the thing that everybody's talking about right now, the Vince McMahon documentary. Now, myself and Larson over at the Going In Raw podcast dropped a whole podcast length review of this show. So if you want the fully detailed version of my thoughts on the Vince McMahon doc, it's available right now. However, I'll give you guys the Cliff's Notes here at WrestleJuice, and then I'm going to go into whether I think it was a good idea or a bad idea to do this, because one of our first ones here was actually from Alex Good, who said, "Good idea, bad idea, Netflix releasing a potentially damning doc about Vince and the company he built 3 months before the Raw Netflix launch." We're going to get into that. I think you can tell from the way I'm reading that, probably where I stand on that. But my very basic thought on the documentary in whole is that this was supposed to be, it was billed as a documentary about Vince McMahon. And honestly, it really came off more, at least for the first like 4 episodes, as a history of WWE, and not a very comprehensive one at that, or at least not one that covered ground that I think hasn't been covered extensively before. Now, a lot of the comments that I've seen both on Twitter, in social media, in the comments over at the review that we did was, this wasn't meant for you, Steve. This isn't meant for the hardcore fan who's already seen all the documentaries out there, who's maybe even read some books about these various topics. And I get that. I understand that the documentary was for that audience, not me audience. It was for the Netflix audience, people who might remember Stone Cold Steve Austin or Hulk Hogan, or maybe even the John Cena, prime days of the mid-aughts or whatever. And I understand that it's for people who are sort of like flipping around Netflix and they come across it and they're like, oh, this could be interesting. I understand all that. However, in a documentary that's meant to be about Vince McMahon, I feel like, and I understand that Vince McMahon and WWE are kind of like I disagree, actually. I don't think they're interchangeable. Obviously, the story of one is intermixed with the story of the other one. However, my bottom line on that is it didn't really dive as deep into Vince McMahon as I would have liked it to have dove, whatever. It didn't really cut to, like, there were little bits and pieces here and there. I maintain this was like 90% WWE centric history and 10%, oh shit, we actually got a little bit of insight into what exactly the deal with Vince is. One of the issues with Vince McMahon and doing a documentary about him is that so many of the people around him, especially before the lawsuit, which is when the interviews took place, so many of the people around him were never going to say anything about Vince McMahon that would paint him in a negative light. He's got a bunch of yes men around him. And I feel like there are probably people out there who could speak a bit more in depth about what makes McMahon tick. But unfortunately, for the purposes of this documentary, is basically the filmmakers asking him questions and then contradicting what he had to say with basically either footage from WWE or other points of view from the interviews that were conducted, the other interviews that were conducted. So we were left with what I think is kind of an incomplete thesis about Vince McMahon. The documentary is called Mr. McMahon, and so I even thought that they were going to sort of dive into, is the real Mr. McMahon enmeshed with the character Mr. McMahon? And yes, they did go into that, but I feel like it was not nearly as in-depth as, for example, what they did with the Ric Flair. I think it was like a 30 for 30. I forget what it was exactly. I think it was a 30 for 30, but it was an excellent documentary where Flair opened up quite a bit about his own, psychological state of mind. So I thought that the documentary left a lot to be desired. Again, understanding that it necessarily isn't me, but it also goes against the very premise that was set up. The title, Mr. McMahon, you think it's going to be a documentary about what makes this guy. And really it was an exploration of WWE. So now let's move on to the actual question here. First, I'll take this from 2 different points of view. Alex Good, to reiterate, says, "Good idea, bad idea. Netflix releasing a potentially damning doc about Vince and company he built 3 months before the Raw Netflix launch." So whether or not this is a good idea or a bad idea depends on who you're applying it to, right? Good idea, bad idea for Netflix. It's gotten a lot of attention. It's a subject that, number one, wrestling always performs well when it comes to, for example, Dark Side of the Ring. That always does really, really well. Whenever the wrestling as a documentary is presented to the public, it usually does pretty well. It's a fascinating subject. It is an incredibly unique, bizarre form of entertainment that has its roots in, like the 1910s, 1920s, basically. And so it's always interesting ground to cover. Netflix is about to launch Raw in January. Now, I would suggest that maybe, just maybe, yeah, this is probably a bad idea because at the end of the day, it leaves a gnarly taste in your mouth. This was a bad idea for Vince McMahon. I don't know why Vince ever would have agreed to do this. I understand that the guy has like a massively outsized ego, but when he sits down and he says, even if it was rape, the statute of limitations is already up, when he's talking about the Rita Chatterton sexual assault allegations. What kind of answer is that? Like, I don't think for a second that he ever would have thought this would. It almost feels like this is a situation where he wanted the challenge of defending his own life. Maybe he understands there's a perception out there that he's a piece of shit. I don't know. And maybe he felt this is an opportunity to combat that. I don't know why he would have agreed to do this. Because he's really kind of a piece of shit. And that one line about the statute of limitations, I think a lot of people right now are pointing out, like, what was that? What does that have to do with anything? So they can't arrest you right now. And then it turns out there was a settlement where they reopened, a second chance, whatever it was in New York, when they opened like a second chance for sexual assault victims to, sue their attackers. So in any event, for Vince McMahon, this is a bad idea. This was not good publicity. This was not even like back before the lawsuit stuff happened, because that's when this happened. This was not, I don't know why he ever would have agreed to this. Man, if you got skeletons in your closet, you don't want a guy like Bill Simmons with a shit ton of resources to start digging around. You don't really want that. You don't want a piece designed to explore your life if you know that you've sort of lived it as kind of a piece of shit. On the other hand, he's got a massive ego, and he probably just feels like his successes, not excesses, are going to be celebrated in this thing. So maybe that's why he did it. In any event, it was a bad idea for him. Probably not a great idea for Netflix either. If you've got this $5 billion deal for this programming that you're going to launch on your channel, and 3 months before then, and I understand that the news cycle, the social media cycle, they're very, very quick these days. They're very fast. The churn is very fast. But, like, you've got this programming coming up. Don't you want as much raw WWE as you can get? So to speak. So, bad idea for Netflix. This was not a good idea kind of for anybody involved. It really isn't. When Stone Cold sits up there and says, I'm not a CTE guy. I don't believe in it. I would like some more context there, sir. What exactly don't you believe in CTE? Did you not believe that it was Chris Benoit, the brain damage that he had sustained, that caused him to do that? Can we get some clarification? Do you not believe the science behind it? I'm kind of really curious what he meant when he said that. So yeah, I don't know that this was a good idea for anybody involved. I mean, it's a good idea for, the general public to get some more information about Vince McMahon. Sure, but like, it was a bad idea for Netflix to do this. And I feel like, look, if you want the wrestling audience, you're going to get the wrestling. Was this meant to like be an advertisement for WWE on Netflix coming up in January? I don't know. I don't know why they would have done this. It's kind of crazy. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on to some of these other good idea, bad ideas. First up from Tia Kater Says, good idea, bad idea. Mixed tag belts. Please. I would love for WWE to bring back the mixed match challenge. And yes, make it a division. Why not? They've got a huge roster. And for all the people out there saying, oh, they already don't do anything with their tag titles, the men's or the women's tag titles. Well, then they just got to do better, because you sign a new deal with Facebook and, or I guess maybe Twitter. Twitter already has speed. So you get Facebook again. And you do the mixed match challenge there. I thought that shit was awesome. Everybody kind of just had fun with it. It felt more like house show matches than anything, because everybody was just having a lot of fun with it. So yeah, bring it back. And the titles. Absolutely. Some to the Pakistani belt maker. Says, good idea or bad idea. Booking slash lights out matches. Booking lights out matches for women like AEW does and WWE seemingly refrains from doing. Yeah, for women, the lights out stuff. Yeah, hell yeah. They always bring it. Absolutely. Whenever there's a lights out match, people bring it. So I say women, men. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely have them do it. Good idea. The Pepsi Dude 1 says, good idea, bad idea. Tony Khan separates the Elite and CM Punk on different shows. So we've had this good idea, bad idea before. However, it was more framed as giving CM Punk his own show, kind of as Booker. I didn't really explore the idea of, this is what we're going to do. This is the reason we're going to give CM Punk his own show. And it's to separate them from, having to see each other when they show up at TV. That was a bad idea, because essentially you're just running away from a problem. You're not trying to mediate things. And I know maybe behind the scenes they did try to mediate things, but if you can't resolve the conflict, a brand split isn't going to help that. You know why? Because you still have pay-per-views, and anything can happen backstage at a pay-per-view. And that's exactly what happened. This was completely predictable. Jack Perry getting choked out by CM Punk. That was completely predictable. You gotta get everybody on the same page. That's what you gotta do. So yeah, I think that was a bad idea. I am sad though, to this day, that we missed out on what could have been a cool Real World's Champion program. It seemed like some of the things that evidently Punk, because he was evidently sort of leading the charge there, was setting up on that show. I really like Collision for that month it was on, or whatever, however long he was on Collision. God, what did it start in July? And then All In was what, like late August? Was it even 2 months? I don't know. Let's see here. Nathan Spencer says, Mysterio versus Guerrero custody ladder match. Good idea, bad idea. Great idea. The match was tons of fun. Dominic was pretty great with all of his reactions, and they had him with like a social worker, some crazy shit like that. The match was really good. Eddie Guerrero saying, I'm your new Papi essay to Dom was hilarious. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that match. And yeah, why not? The stipulation, everybody's cool with it. Everybody's happy with it. I like the soap opera-esque nature of the build where Eddie's saying, hey, you're my real son. I still don't know. Maybe you guys in the comments can pinpoint the moment where they actually, in kayfabe, in the story, say that no, Eddie wasn't actually Dom's dad. If you look at Rey Mysterio's face and Dom's face, it's clear that Dom is Rey's son. That is 1,000%. But that's like real life. In the storyline, did they ever actually say that no, we were wrong about this? Dom is actually Rey's kid. I'm kind of curious because I've looked into it a little bit and I couldn't find it. Let's see here. Claus Techno, good idea, bad idea. Tony Khan buying Ring of Honor. Good idea, because otherwise I think it probably just would have, I don't know. I don't even think WWE would have bought it, to be honest with you. Like, what would, for the tape, maybe for the tape library so they can do documentaries, like more documentaries, I guess, maybe for a lot of their talent. So eventually it would have probably just been stripped down for parts. I don't think WWE would have kept the brand alive. I don't think that would have happened. So yeah, Tony Khan getting his hands on it. I think that's good. I think if you look at the last year or so from Ring of Honor, after AEW started, Ring of Honor was really struggling. And a lot of those wrestlers that were around then are still around now, but in AEW, they're still working. It's still a brand that puts on, from what I understand, pretty good pay-per-views. The show is paywalled. It'd be ideal if they put Ring of Honor on Max. Honestly, if they did a little bit more with Ring of Honor in terms of stories and whatnot, from what I understand, it's still just sort of like they just throw a bunch of matches out there. But then again, I haven't watched in a while. My one complaint about Ring of Honor is that Athena is stuck behind a paywall. Bring Athena to cable television. Please goddamn do that. Please do that. She's awesome. She'd always been one of my favorite wrestlers, like an in-ring wrestler. And yeah, she's just paywalled. And I think I have the Ring of Honor service. I just don't ever watch it because I just don't have the time for it. So Tony Khan buying it, I think it was a good idea. I do. They lean so much into pre-AEW history for a lot of their characters and feuds and stories that it just makes sense for him to own it. And on top of that, the All-In situation, the original All-In situation, he owns that as well. So I think that's a good thing as well. Anyways, that's going to do it for Good Idea, Bad Idea. Thanks everybody for submitting yours. I'm going to use the same thread I used this week for next week's Good Idea, Bad Idea. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. What did you think of the Vince McMahon documentary? All right, WrestleJuice fam, talk to you later.